name is Michael Mobley, Managing Director of VJM. There's my email address there. And this is a webinar on strategic planning. So let's begin to talk about that. And I'll start with the learning objectives for our webinar today. And I'm going to talk about a couple of things that may seem obvious, but they're not. Define strategy, and then I'll define strategic planning. And then sort of a wrinkle here that I want to build in that's incredibly important to your business, whether you're a startup or a late stage, and that is understand the concept of business value. And what I will say about that is there are a lot of misconceptions about business value that have a negative impact on the success of the business owner. And I'll talk more about that as we go through the webinar today. And then understand the connection between strategy and value. And then finally, identify some of the key elements of strategic plans. So when we talk about strategy, it really is a means to an end. How do we give ourselves the best opportunity to realize favorable business outcomes? You probably have heard the old cliche, failing to plan is planning to fail. And that really is true. Oftentimes you can be successful on a hit and miss basis. I know business owners who don't plan and they've been able to achieve some success, but perhaps not the success that they could have. And also at a certain point, they achieve diminishing returns because they haven't been able to structure their business from a planning standpoint to take them to that next level. So again, a strategy is a means to achieve a favorable business outcome and identifies where you can be most successful. And this statement addresses that. It's about positioning your organization into those most profitable market niches where the competition is either weak or not present at all. Now, you will hear some business owners say, well, I don't care about competition, and that is unfortunate because you have competition. Further, oftentimes, we don't clearly define competition. So one of the examples I use about that is if you're in the restaurant business, and you may say our competition is other restaurants. Well, that really is an inadequate view of your competition. Because if you're talking about a restaurant, you're talking about disposable dollars. That is dollars that individuals and families have to spend that don't constitute what we call necessities. So if you are in competition for those discretionary dollars, then not only are you in competition with restaurants, but movie theaters, other entertainment venues, so on and so forth. So there needs to be a clear definition of what constitutes competition. And in order for your business to be successful, the best opportunity you have is to position yourself in those most profitable market niches where either you can beat competition or competition is not present. Now, with that last line, competition is not present, we need to be mindful of that because if those groups of products and markets become profitable and successful, you're going to have competition coming in to try to compete for that. So competition may not be there for the time being, but if you and others around you are successful, it will be there. And then the third aspect of strategy is very important because this gets to part of your why. And I'll talk about the why a little bit later on. But you want to be clear about why is your organization going to be successful? And this statement really helps you with that. This company will succeed because it offers whatever you offer to whomever you offer it, and it will be better or different from the competition because. So if you think about this, this really positions you in terms of what your product service offerings are, who your target market is, and what is your competitive advantage. Real fundamental issues having to do with the success or failure of your business. And so again, you want to take this statement and a fundamental statement that you need to be able to answer for your business. Now let's talk a bit more about this, and I want to talk about something called the strategic sweet spot. And one of my favorite terms, I used to teach entrepreneurship at a college many years ago, and one of the things I talked to my students about was identifying your unique selling proposition, which is another way of saying your competitive advantage. So if you look at this chart, there's what your brand does well, there is what your competitors do well, and then there's what the consumer wants. So the strategic sweet spot, is what's called the winning zone, which is that intersection between what your brand does well and what the consumer wants. And so that check mark is that niche where you want to do business because that gives you the best opportunity to grow and to be profitable. The losing zone, however, is where your competition is better than you are, and they also provide what the consumer wants. In this situation, as the statement says here, you're likely to be crushed. And then where so many businesses compete, for better or for worse, is called the risky zone. Here, where your competitor and you are pretty much on par, you both offer what the consumer wants. By competing in this niche, you run the risk of becoming a commodity business. So let me give you an example of a commodity business: auto insurance. If you get to the ABCs of auto insurance, they're all pretty much the same. There may be a nuance here or there that might be different, but they're all the same. And if you pay attention to advertisements with auto insurance, they don't talk about fundamentally beating the competition. They'll show you an amphibian or a reptile, whatever it is, trying to catch your attention, or they'll have a woman dressed up for the last 20 years named Flo, or they'll say that you're in good hands, or they'll have a couple of athletes, as with State Farm. It's all about trying to get your attention, and what they're trying to create is top of mind. That is, when you think auto insurance, they want you to think of that gecko or Flo or those athletes, because that's the first place I want to go. But if you break it down, they're not talking about the viability of their particular insurance products, because at the end of the day, they're all pretty much the same. So again, that's when you run the risk of becoming a commodity. So ideally, you want to compete in this winning zone where you beat competition and you offer what the consumer wants. Okay. And I will ask, are there any questions about that? Okay. If they come up, again, Christy will interrupt me and we'll address those questions. So let's then talk about strategy. What does strategy do? What is strategy? Well, it is a future look to your business. If you have applied or gotten money externally from a bank, the bank is going to want an annual operating plan, and that's fine. But in terms of planning your future, you want to stretch that out a little bit. Now, there was a time many years ago when you would hear people talk about 5-year strategic plans. That's a bit much now because things, particularly technology, changes so quickly. So really what we're talking about is 3 to 5 years, with 3 years sort of being what I call the hard plan. That is, you're putting in specific tactics that you're going to engage in, you're putting numbers around that. And years 4 to 5 are more prospective. We will flesh out those years as we begin to get more experience. So a 3 to 5 year period. And what it does, it figures out, okay, what are we going, or helps us figure out, what are we going to offer in particular markets, and how do we get those products and services to those markets? In other words, it gets to the strategies and the tactics that you use to make yourself viable with your customers in your served markets. And going back to the idea of the operating plan, the idea of developing a strategic plan helps develop cohesion between what you do on a day-to-day basis and what you're trying to accomplish on a long-term basis. There should be an absolute alignment around what you do weekly, daily, quarterly, annually with your ultimate strategic objectives. It also becomes a platform to encourage teamwork, to achieve common objectives. I won't go into the viability of teamwork, but an author named Patrick Lencioni said that teamwork is the ultimate competitive advantage. And I also believe that organizations succeed or fail based on the performance of people, and the performance of people is enhanced by effective leadership. So essentially, if you have a good team, strong leadership, and good teamwork, you have a better opportunity to achieve the objectives that you lay out in your strategy. All of this works to allow you to increase your opportunity for business success. So this essentially is what strategy is. So from strategy, we now move on to strategic planning. And by the way, if I'm going too fast, let me know. If I'm going too slow, let me know. I want to have the, what is it, the baby bear? Papa bear was what, too hot? Mama bear too cold? Baby bear just right? It's been a long time since I read that. I may have that wrong, but you get the point. I want it to be just right. Okay. With regard to strategic planning, there are 3 statements here that are fundamental to understanding strategic planning. And you're going to see one word that is emphasized in each one of these statements. So let's look at the first statement. Strategic planning is the continuous process of making risk-taking decisions systematically with the greatest knowledge of their futurity, not futility, futurity. And so if you look at this statement, let's break it down. First of all, strategic planning is a continuous process. I've seen a lot of organizations for whom strategic planning is a fixed process. And as soon as they finish planning, they have this wonderful document that they put on the shelf and they don't use. Strategic planning is a continuous process, first and foremost. Number two, you're taking risks today in a systematic way that will help you ideally secure your future. So taking risk today, planning is about risk. The future is about risk. It's not about taking risks that are willy-nilly, but it's being systematic in your approach to understanding those risks. You anticipate the future, you plan the future, you try to create the future. That's what it's all about. But it's a systematic process. The second statement is organizing systematically the efforts needed to carry out these decisions. You have to get organized. Do we have the right people? Do we have the right technology? Do we have the right support services? Do we have enough capital? Have we identified clearly the market? So on and so forth. Systematic approaches to organizing yourselves and all of your resources in order to carry out these decisions. And the third statement is measure the results of these decisions against expectations through organized, systematic feedback. Now, in the strategic planning process, where it tends to break down is really among all three of these, but that third bullet is really important. Do we have clear expectations? And do we have measurable results that we can use to figure out whether those expectations have been met? So again, these are the three fundamental statements that are important when we talk about strategic planning. They have key words in them, but the most important key word is that it is a systematic approach. There is a process to this. It cannot be willy-nilly because you run the risk of missing something that can be incredibly important to what you're trying to do. This is a very important series of statements. Are there any questions about this statement, or does anyone need any clarity regarding these statements? Okay, continuing on. Strategic planning can be a communication vehicle. You're letting all of your stakeholders know, that is employers, investors, bankers, what your goals are and how you plan to get to those goals. That communication creates clarity. It helps define expectations. And if you have clear expectations, that means you can hold people accountable. Accountability is fundamental to the achievement of the strategic plan. And your banker, your investor particularly will want to know who is responsible for this. How are you holding them accountable? Because essentially they either want their money returned if they've loaned you money, or they want to get a return on that investment if they're investing capital on an equity basis. So again, it's a communication vehicle in terms of identifying what you plan to do, and it identifies the things that you need to do to achieve those goals. And it identifies all other critical elements to achieving those goals, all of the resources that you need, the perspectives that you have, the milestones that you have to achieve, so on and so forth, all within a framework of a systematic approach. So then the question becomes, and I get asked this all the time, well, why is strategic planning so important? Why do we need to do that? It seems to be a very involved process. Why do we have to do that? Well, it helps you set priorities. You can be faced with a lot of opportunities, a lot of wonderful people who can add value to your organization, but you can't do everything. Further, unless someone on this call has several $100 million in the bank, you have fixed capital, and you have to prioritize your activity so that you prioritize your capital investment. There's a concept called capital budgeting, which essentially means within the framework of the capital that you have, what are our best investment opportunities and what return criteria do we want to have to realize those opportunities? The only way to essentially focus on your return on investment is to set priorities. Set priorities based on what you're trying to achieve in the market, your most profitable products and services, and other items that you want to look at. So it helps set priorities for the period of your strategic plan. And as I just alluded to, it focuses your energy and resources, and really energy is a resource. You have a limited number of people that you can bring in. You have limited capital. You may be limited from a technological standpoint. How do we take all of these resources and focus on getting a return on that investment? Again, strategic planning helps do that, and setting priorities is fundamental to that. By doing all of this, you strengthen your operations. You have individuals and activities that are focused on realizing value, which I'll talk about in a second. And it ensures that everyone in that organization, all of your stakeholders, are working toward common goals, that we understand what we're trying to achieve. We're clear as to what we need to do to achieve it. We have clear expectations. We've established accountability. We understand what the goals are. And for those of you who are leaders in your businesses, it is incumbent upon you to make sure everyone is on board with those goals, and you err on the side of over communicating those goals. I advise clients all the time, whenever you meet with your team, you go back over those goals. Yes, it may seem redundant. People may get tired of it, but it's about repetition. And the more you repeat things, the more it becomes ingrained. And you want those common goals to be at least second nature with every person who works in that organization. And again, by doing this plan, you establish outcomes, expected outcomes and expected results. So you know where you're going. You can't just say, I want to build a great business. I don't know what that means. You have to be specific about what you're trying to achieve and not leave it out there floating around, because then how do you know when you got there if you don't know where you're going? So you want to understand where you're trying to get to. In addition, there are aspects of your business that you're not going to be able to control. There are things that happen in the environment. We have an inflationary economy right now. Interest rates are going up. There have been oil crises that was exacerbated by the invasion of the Ukraine. There are a lot of things going on that are out of your control. And I'll talk about that in a second. But what you can do is understand and plan, how do we respond to these things? How do we respond to an economic shock? How do we respond to an inflationary environment? Putting together a strategic plan helps you accomplish that, so that you're not being reactive with your business, you're being proactive. So again, you can't control the environment, but you can control your response to that environment. And then finally, all of this is leading up to the importance of creating value. And I'm going to say something here that may go against the grain of what you have always thought or what someone taught you. And I'm going to repeat this a couple of times in the webinar. The value of your business is not the sole province of how profitable your business is. Let me say that again. Simpler. The value of your business is not tied solely to profit. And that is a fundamental mistake that business owners make over the years. And I'll give you a statistic. I told you that I work a lot with business owners who are trying to exit their business. And one of the things that I always tell them is that 85% of small business owners who exit their businesses are unhappy in the aftermath. Think of that. 85% of business owners are unhappy once they leave their business. And there are two primary reasons for that. The first one is that they didn't do enough planning about what they would do once they sold their businesses. They say things like, I'm going to play golf, or I'm going to travel, and all of that gets old very, very quickly. And I cannot tell you how many calls I've gotten from spouses, primarily wives, who have said, can you find something for my husband to do because he's getting on my last nerve and I need to get him out of the house. So that's the first reason. But the second reason, relevant to what we're talking about here, is that business owners don't get the cash they think they deserve from selling their business. And the reason for that is they say, well, I have a business that's been profitable for all these years, yet no one would negotiate with me at the level that I wanted for me selling my business, and I had to take something less. And that's because they felt that profit was the sole determinant of the value of their business, and it's not. And we'll talk more about that a little bit later. But that's an important concept for you as a business owner or someone looking to start your business to understand that you just can't be profitable. There are other aspects to your business, and I'm going to walk you through some of that in a couple of minutes.
We do have a question, Michael.
Okay.
In the 3 to 5 year phase, how do you honestly communicate your time management to your stakeholders? Oftentimes, our goals shape up in ways where timing doesn't always seem the most effective.
You have to be flexible. It's like when you buy a car. As soon as you buy a car and you leave the lot, that car is depreciated at some amount. You have to be flexible and say, this is the best information we have to move forward. And if we get better information and we have more time to deal with that information, we'll change what we're looking to do. In this day and age, in this economy, 6 months is a long time, let alone 3 to 5 years. But what this does is it provides you a perspective and a starting point that says, this is what we planned. And one of the fundamental questions you always have to ask is what we said we were going to do still relevant, given what's going on in the environment, given new opportunities we have or opportunities that we've lost. So one of the watchwords of strategic planning is to be flexible, because these things are going to change over time, and that you need to be able to react to those changes in order to keep yourself on the right path. And I think your bankers, your investors understand that things change. And I think that they would appreciate that flexibility. Now, they don't want you to back down too quickly, but you don't want to bang your head against the wall trying to get something done that's no longer valid. And I think that process of consistent communication is what opens them up to the viability of what you're talking about. The last thing you want to do is blindside your banker, blindside your investor. You want to keep them informed about what you're doing, what your perspectives are, ask for their input. By engaging them, sometimes you can get them to help you with the situation. So that's what I would recommend. And Christy, my question back to them is, did I answer their question clearly?
Yes, they said, thank you for answering my question.
Okay, good. Any other questions?
More of a comment, but you might be able to touch on this. They said they were concerned about planning for exiting. That's a concern for them, exiting their business.
Okay. Well, let me ask, are you at the point where you're ready to exit your business?
Not quite, but 3 to 5 years out.
Okay. Well, first of all, it's good that you're thinking about it now. On average, it takes about 7 years to come up with a viable exit strategy. And I know that sounds like a long time, but without going through detail right now, it is a very involved process. One of the things I would say to you is begin to identify resources that can help you with that exit. It's a very complicated process, and I will tell you that a lot of business owners get very frustrated with all of the moving parts associated with that exit. And so I liken that, and since we're in football season, I'm an old football player, I liken that to a football team. If you don't, in this day and age, if you don't have an effective quarterback on your team, it will be difficult for your team to be successful. You need the quarterback, who essentially is the CEO of the team. That individual becomes the focal point, if you will, for all of the issues that need to be resolved on offense, defense, and special teams in order for the team to win. In that same vein, there's so many moving parts to an exit strategy that you need to identify resources that can serve as a quarterback for you to help you walk through all of these moving parts, because again, it can be very, very frustrating. And what you don't want is to have 20 people whispering in your ear about what you should do. It's important to find a firm or an individual who can decode all of the things that will be coming to you, who can filter through all of the conflicting messages that you're going to get about how best to exit your business. So I think that's important. And the fact that you're starting now speaks well, because you can get a leg up on most who wait until the last minute, because they're fundamental questions that you have to answer in terms of your readiness to exit. And again, I don't have time to go through them now, but there are 3 fundamental questions that you have to answer, and only you can answer them, but you can answer them with some help as to why those questions are important. Any follow-up to that? And if you want, I can put my email address up a little bit later on if you want to connect with me about that. I'll be certainly willing to help you get you started.
No follow-up to that. They said they did meet with a SCORE advisor, which is also highly recommended if you haven't met with a SCORE mentor.
And I apologize. I should have been in advertising mode here to talk about SCORE, so that is absolutely a viable start. So I apologize for that, Christy. Any other questions? So then let's talk about business value. And our first question that I'm sure many of you are asking is, why do we need to focus on value? I'm an early stage business. I'm a startup, trying to get my feet wet, trying to get my first dollar of profit. Why do I need to focus on value? Well, let's talk about that. First of all, in a small business, that can be among the most valuable assets that you have. You may have a house, you may have a portfolio of securities. That small business has the potential to become an incredibly valuable asset. And you want to manage that value like you would your portfolio, like you would understanding the value of your home. So again, you want to make sure that you're focused on creating that value in your business, which means you need to understand where you are. What is the current value of my business? If you're beyond the startup phase, I would say, and if you're in the early stage, I would have an evaluation every couple of years. You don't need to do it all the time, but just understand, what is the value of my business today? That becomes a starting point for you. There are a number of banks will do that. Certain accounting firms will do it. SCORE probably has resources that can help you with that. So you want to understand the value of your business, because it becomes a baseline. Because once you're in business and you're trying to grow your business and make it profitable, you want to focus on creating future value. And identify the options available to you to realize that value. Now, what do I mean by that? At some point, you're going to want to exit your business one way or the other for a myriad of reasons. And so what's your best option to realize that value? Do I want to sell? Do I want to turn it over to my children? Do I want to sell it to employees? Do I want to hold on to it and let someone else run it? There are a lot of options out there, and it's never too soon to begin to think about those options. So how can I realize the value of that business? And as I said earlier, and as I will say ad nauseum during our webinar today, profit is not the sole determinant of value. So if there's anything, well, if there are 5 things that you remember from this webinar, that's one of them. Profit is not the sole determinant of value. Please do not make that mistake. You do so at your own peril. And finally, why focus on value? You need to understand how other people may value your business. Like beauty, value is in the eye of the beholder. And I'll talk more about that in a second, but just because you value your business a particular way doesn't mean someone else is going to value it the same way. And so consequently, you may feel, I've done all these great things, I've done this, I've done that, but people can have a different perspective. And that is another contributing factor to why a business owner, 85% as a matter of fact, are unhappy in the aftermath of the sale, because they say, I thought my business was, rather than what do they think my business is worth. And if there's a disconnect, that gives you some sense of what you might do. So again, here's why focus on value. Let's talk about the benefits of business value. And I've talked about alignment before. And essentially, when you focus on value, this is what we're trying to do. If we had one thing we're focused on doing, it is creating value for that business. As a consequence, then you align everything about you with that objective, your personal life, your financial affairs, your business affairs, all focused on creating value for this business, either for yourself, your family, or whomever. And because I'm going to make a judgment here that I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, are in business to create wealth. Wealth for yourself, wealth for your family. Now, let me be clear, wealth also is in the eye of the beholder. So one person's concept of wealth may be different than another person's concept. You have to create that for yourself. Whatever wealth may mean I don't have to work for anybody and I can take care of myself. Wealth may mean I am in charge and I like being in charge. Wealth could mean that I'm going to make $125 million the first week that I'm open. Whatever it means for you, you have to define that for yourself. Because it positions you, if you focus on value, to better realize the value, that you won't make that mistake that created that 85% number. If you're consistently focused on value and you understand what value means, it gives you the best opportunity to be among that 15% of people who are happy once they exit that business. Everything that you do in the business should be focused on creating value, everything. I have told clients, if you buy a box of pencils, you want to be able to understand, why does that box of pencils help me create value? It sounds mundane, but that's the mindset that you need to have, because it's the mindset that you need to communicate to people working for and with you. And the question you as the business owner should consistently ask is, if I'm being asked to do something, how does this contribute to value creation? And people need to answer that question in a way that convinces you it is a viable option. And if you do that, then you have the best opportunity to get your staff to think and operate like owners, whether or not they have equity in your business. And this is always a challenge. How do I get my employees to think more like I do? They will rarely ever get there because essentially they don't have any equity in the business. However, if you emphasize these points, everything has to do with value creation. If I want to hire someone, fine. How does that help us create value? I want to have this big event for our customers, fine. How does that help us create value? And yes, you will sound like a broken record. Yes, people will think you are a pain in the hindquarters, but at the end of the day, if you can create that consistent focus, more and more your staff will think and operate like owners. Questions about that? Okay. So benefits of value focus. So the next question I'm sure you're chomping at the bit to ask is, what is value? What is value? Now, I can't ask you that, so we'll just continue on with it. Value is the measure of the worth of a business. We just talked about worth. But the question becomes, as I said to you earlier, worth to whom? Worth to you as the owner, worth to investors, potential buyers, to bankers, whomever. And you want to be clear that your starting point is, what is it worth to me? As you get closer to exit, you're going to want to know what it might be worth to others. If you have equity investors, they're going to want to know, they're going to want to have a concept of worth, and be mindful that your concept of worth as the owner may be different than the investor's concept of worth, because the investor may want something else in a particular time that doesn't align with what you want. So again, it's something to consider as you get investors. So again, worth to whom? And then how do you measure that worth? Well, again, it can be all over the map. For some people, it's your financial results. For others, it is your market presence. Some people value the people that you have in the business. Some value your technology. Some just want your cash. It can be all over the map, and you need to understand the potential concepts associated with someone else's measurement of worth. It also can help you clarify that worth. Again, if profit is not the sole determinant, well, profit may be a part of the financial indice of value, but then there's market presence. That's not profit. There are the people that you have. That's not profit. There's the technology. There's the cash. So again, you're beginning to see the multiple dimensions associated with the value of your business. So then how do we create that value? How do we create that value? Well, When we talk about creating value, we're talking about creating wealth. However you define wealth, that's what we're talking about creating. And so then, well, let me stop. There's an individual by the name of Peter Drucker. Peter Drucker was a well-known guru with regard to management. Anyone who is in academia, one of the people they will quote most often is Peter Drucker. And Peter Drucker said that the purpose of a business is to create a customer. The purpose of a business is to create a customer. And to the extent that you can create a customer, you can develop a market. And to the extent that you can develop a market, you then can have a business. So that's your starting point. The purpose of a business is to create a customer. You want to help that customer, you want to have that customer help you create a market or serve a market. And if you do that well, then you can create a business. So essentially what Peter Drucker is saying, that if you can satisfy that customer by offering them what they want or need, and I'll talk about want or need in a second, what they want or need, and you can satisfy that customer on a continuous basis, then you can take all of those resources that you have invested in the development of your business and turn that into wealth. It's called return on investment. And so the capital, the resources that you invest in the business, if you manage it correctly, can get that return. That return can be translated into wealth. Any questions about creating value? So I talked before, and I will continue to talk about profit not being the sole determinant of value. What I want to focus on are 8 key drivers of value. Now, clearly there are more, but here are 8 key drivers of value, and I'll tell you a little bit about each one of them. Those 8 key drivers are financial performance, growth potential, reduced business concentration, cash flow management, recurring revenue, unique selling proposition, which is another way of saying your competitive advantage, customer satisfaction, and having a turnkey operation. 8 key drivers of value, and you see that only one has to do with profit. So let's talk about financial performance. And these are the things you typically see, that you typically think of, at least the first 2 bullets are. That last bullet may surprise you. And so everybody, I shouldn't say everybody, you want to increase your revenue. And notice here, I don't say increase profit, I say increase profit margin. If you hold your expenses standard, and your revenue increases, your profit is going to increase. But what you want to be able to do is increase your profit margin. How can we find more profitable products? How can we reduce our expenses? So again, increase revenue, increase profit margin. This third bullet, I dare say you may not have thought about, but it's incredibly important. And that is to have formal accounting and bookkeeping. And I suggest you not do it yourself, that you get help, because at the end of the day, part of your ability to run that business is understanding your numbers and understanding those numbers on a regular basis. That is, you don't wait until the year ends and you have to fill out taxes and that sort of thing. It's understanding your numbers on a real-time basis. And when people ask me, what is one of the things I should look for? What are the things I should look for when I engage an accountant or bookkeeper? I say 2 things. One, get someone who speaks English. And I don't mean English as a language. I mean English as they're not going to try to dazzle you with all of these accounting terms to try to let you know how smart they are, that they communicate with you in a way that you understand. One of the fundamentals of communication, and one of the mistakes that we all make, we communicate in the way we want to communicate, when in fact we should communicate in the way the person wants to receive the communication. So you want to have an attorney, an accountant, a tax person who communicates with you in the way you want to receive that communication. Number 2, someone who is truly interested in the success of your business, not someone who closes your books on a monthly basis, but someone willing to take you not only through your numbers, but what the implications of those numbers are, to offer some additional services other than just saying, here are your numbers, have a nice day. In addition, and a lot of small businesses don't do that, but for those of you involved with government contracting, you may be required to have audits. And so if you're going to have a good audit outcome, you need to have viable, defendable numbers. You need to have good accounting and bookkeeping procedures, which means you need to engage an appropriate professional to help you through that. Any questions about that before I move on?
We had a question from the previous slide on value. They want to know the difference between creating value and discovering value. They say they're in the process of identifying what the customer wants. So they feel like their businesses are creating, they don't feel like their businesses are creating customers yet.
Okay, well, I think you are, unless I misunderstood the last part of the comment. Could you repeat that, Christy, when she talked about, well, the person talked about customers?
She said, I'm in the process of identifying what my customers want, so I don't feel like my businesses are creating my customers yet.
Okay, well, I disagree with you because you made the statement, I'm identifying what my customers want. So at least you have some concept of your customer. Now, what you're trying to do is to see if you have the value proposition that the customer wants. In other words, am I offering the products or services to my prospects? And I guess prospects is a better word. And if I'm not, then I need to find other prospects. If I am, then I have the opportunity to create a customer. Because again, that customer, I don't want to go back several slides, but it's about finding that sweet spot. What you offer that's better than competition and what the prospect or the customer wants. So you are creating that customer, and your ability to maintain that customer is a function of your ability to satisfy them on an effective and continuous basis. So I think you are. You just have to prove the concept that we in fact have products and services that these prospects want, so they can become definitive customers. Any follow-up to that, or do you have a follow-up question?
She said, I'm glad you said maintain. And she said, great.
Okay, all right. Any other questions? All right, we talked about financial performance. Let's move on to growth potential. And essentially, it's pretty easy conceptually. What opportunities do you have to sell new products to existing customers? What opportunities you have in other geographic markets? What opportunities do you have in other demographic markets? Pretty simple. And now it's simple in concept, not necessarily simple in execution, but this is your starting point. Do we have products that we can expand to different customers, to different demographics, to different geographies? Can we take products and services and sort of rationalize them to get to sort of new products? Can we take a product that is fundamentally what we want and make it something a little bit different that may appeal to a different demographic, a different geography, those kinds of things? So there's your growth potential. And then there is reduced business concentration. I'm sure you've all heard this at one point or another. You don't want your business to be so heavily tied to a couple of customers, a couple of key employees, a couple of suppliers. You want to have diversity. There's the standard horror story that I'm sure we've all heard, where a successful business is tied to one supplier. That supplier understands that they're your only supplier. They want to raise prices 50%. What choice do you have? Or the plant burns down. What choice do you have? So you want to have a diversity of suppliers. I know a lot of small business owners who are very successful, and they have one customer who provides 75% of their revenue, 80% of their profit. That is entirely too much concentration. That customer may come to you and say, you know, we are a major part of what you do. We want better pricing, and we want you to cut your pricing to us 20%. Otherwise, we're walking. That is negotiation. So again, you want to have a diversity of customers, employees, and suppliers as much and as soon as possible in your business. The value implication of this is if you don't eliminate that concentration, the value of your business goes down for the reasons that I talked about. You're at the whim of one of these individuals or another that could have a negative impact on your business. If I'm looking to buy your business and you have one customer providing 75% of your business, I'm going to discount it significantly. Next is cash flow management. And I said this before, turnover, by the way, means revenue. So this says turnover is vanity. And what does that mean by that? Back when I lived in Ohio, there was a guy that I knew who had a $120 million business. And he was very happy about that. And he would walk around telling anyone who would listen that I have a $120 million business. The problem was his profit margin was about 0.5%. And that's still a fair piece of change, but the point is, I don't view that as a viable business. So turnover is vanity. You can walk around and say, I have this high revenue business, but now we have to get down to brass tacks. How profitable is that business? Profitable is sanity, but at the end of the day, cash is king. And as a business owner, you need to understand this, that profit is nice and profit looks good, but you don't pay yourself with profit. You don't pay your suppliers with profit. You don't pay your employees with profit. You pay with cash. Cash flow is important. Consequently, cash is king. Further, you cannot manage cash from your checkbook. I don't know how many times I have had to tell business owners that because you think you have a certain amount of cash in the bank, that is cash flow management. It is not. Cash flow management is about forecasting the needs you're going to have over a particular period of time so that you can understand, do I need to have a line of credit with the bank to cover my cash shortfalls? What major cash issues are coming up that I need to be mindful of? And you cannot do that just focusing on your bank book. So again, cash flow management is important. And further, I know many of you probably don't want to be accountants, but you need to understand how to read a cash flow statement. You need to understand how to develop a cash flow statement. If there's one thing you should have your accountant take you through on a regular basis, is identifying your cash flow in your business. It's also called a sources and uses statement, sources of fund, uses of fund, whatever. But you want to understand your cash flow. And you need to understand that, again, many of you are away from this, but understand that if you're looking to sell your business, if you don't have sufficient cash flow, that decreases the value of your business. Acquirers are also buying resources. The more cash they have to put up, the less that's going to come into your pocket. So you want to understand this is a zero-sum game pretty much. The more I have to spend as an acquirer, the less you're going to get. I'm going to take it out of your pocket. So then when we talk about improving cash flow, and I've talked about this before, increase your return on investment. That contributes to your cash flow. Collect your receivables as fast as you can. I know there's a temptation to offer terms. If you don't have to, that would be great, but collect your receivables as fast as you can. And without running the risk of going into default, pay your payables as slow as you can. Cash flow management has to do with partially the management of what's called your current assets. Current assets are receivables and inventory. Current payables are short-term debt and accounts payable. Again, your accountant can take you through that if you're not familiar with it. But cash flow management is important, and a good accountant, a good bookkeeper will help you with that endeavor. The next is what's called recurring revenue. Recurring revenue has come to prominence. I mean, it's always been there, but it's come to more prominence over the last 20, 25 years. And essentially, recurring revenue is just that. How can we create a situation where we have revenue coming in on a regular basis without viewing it as a one-off? So let's say selling television sets. You could be in the business of selling television sets, but you have to keep marketing your business and let people know we have more televisions to sell, or they have this new bell and whistle on them. That's not recurring revenue because you have to spend money marketing and all those kinds of things. Recurring revenue essentially means there is a want or need out there that either the customer understands or you help them understand and facilitate to have revenue coming in such that you're not spending the cash that you need on marketing. So let me give you a few examples. The first level of recurring revenue is called consumables. Very simply, groceries. If you like to eat soup, you are going to go to the store and buy yourself a can or some other container of soup. There are other groceries that people buy on hopefully buy on a regular basis, like toothpaste, other food items. So those are consumables. The challenge with consumables are that they can be whimsical purchases, that is totally up to the consumer to make that purchase. Other than their hunger or whatever else they have, there's nothing driving them to do that. And further, they may not pick up your brand, but that is a level of recurring revenue. The next one is what's called sunk money consumables. And the best way to describe that is the example there. You buy a coffee maker. If you're going to utilize that coffee maker, then you have to buy stuff that makes the coffee. And so what's driving you to buy those coffee beans is that you have this coffee maker and you want to utilize that. That's called a sunk money consumable, in that the sunk money is the coffee maker and the consumable is the coffee bean. Sunk money means I've already paid for this coffee maker. I need to use it. Therefore, I need to buy the stuff I need to make coffee. The next level of recurring revenue are subscriptions, typically in magazines. You cannot buy Microsoft Outlook now without subscribing to it. Other organizations are focusing on subscriptions to essentially try to lock in, because with a subscription, you have to take the action to cancel that subscription. And if you don't, then it continues. There's another level of subscription called sunk money subscriptions. And the example I use for this is a Bloomberg terminal. A Bloomberg terminal is what people use to, particularly in the investment community, to track their stocks. Bloomberg terminals essentially only use Bloomberg information. So if you're going to have that sunk money you put into a Bloomberg terminal, you have to buy Bloomberg software in order to measure your stock. The next level of recurring revenue is called auto renewal. And this essentially says renew until cancel. It's another form of subscription. More and more businesses are utilizing this now, that they are asking for your credit card number and they automatically renew until you cancel. And even then you have a window where you have to cancel. If you're beyond that window, you're stuck. And more businesses are doing that now. Bill payers are asking for it. They always say this is for your convenience, and I sort of chuckle at that. I mean, it may be in some cases, but my cynicism says it's not for our convenience. But in any event, more and more businesses are using auto renewal. And then finally, there are contracts. These are obligations to purchase. You sign a contract. When you buy your cell phone or whatever you do with your cell phone, there's a contract associated with that for a number of years. That introductory price goes away after the first year. You are locked in for X period of time. If you cancel, there are severe penalties. So these are examples of recurring revenue. The next driver of value is the unique selling proposition, your competitive advantage. You remember here where we talked about the sweet spot, and you want to be where your brand beats competition and you offer what the consumer wants. And also understand that creating a unique selling proposition is not just about what you sell. It's about understanding that that consumer has pain and they need someone to help solve that pain, that they want a result. If you look down here, creating a USP, they want a result. They want a solution to a problem. And the other thing that they want is to understand why you're in business. Can I make an emotional connection to what you do? And I'll talk more about that later. We want you to buy our toothpaste because that oral hygiene is very, very important. And here's what we do to offer that to you. That is a tangible benefit based on a particular belief that people want to buy into, and why more and more is very important. So again, you want to establish your competitive advantage. By doing that, it gives you a better ability to control your pricing. You can charge higher prices or invest more in marketing or technology. It's an opportunity to create something unique. Again, what is it about us that's better than our competition? And also something that people care about. Next driver of value is customer satisfaction. You hear this all the time. How do we measure customer satisfaction? And there are a lot of ways to do that. There are various surveys, things of that sort. There's something called the Net Promoter Score that I'll talk about in a second that I've come across over the last years. And it's based on responses that you get from a myriad of customers. And it breaks down like this. It can be a predictor of business growth because you know essentially who likes you and who doesn't. And there are three aspects of it in the group. There are the promoters, and these are people that are enthusiastic about your product or service. They make referrals, they're loyal, they keep buying and so forth. There are people who are passive, they're satisfied, but they're unenthusiastic. They may or may not buy your product. They may go to competitors. And then there are detractors, people who are unhappy with your product and services. Often these are the people who would put things on the internet about you that are not particularly complimentary. And again, they can damage your brand if you don't address the issues they put out there. And so essentially your net promoter score is the percent of promoters minus the percent of detractors. Simple concept, net promoter score. And then finally, there's a turnkey operation. And the best way I can explain this is if in your business, you can't be out of it for a month, either on vacation or whatever, and your business cannot run, you do not have a turnkey operation. There was a baseball player back from the 70s named Reggie Jackson. And when he played for the New York Yankees, he said he was the straw that stirred the drink. In other words, he was the one who made the Yankees go. As a business owner, you don't want to say that. You want to develop a team and resources that will allow your business to run without your day-to-day hands-on involvement all the time. So you want to create systems that employees can follow, use automation where possible and viable, focus on being an effective leader. One of the challenges that business owners have is making that transition from someone who does to someone who leads. And at some point, if you build a business, you have to make that transition. So you want to hire first for culture. I'm going to talk about culture in a second here. Hire first for culture, get people in the right positions in the organization, empower them to do their best, and inspire them based on the goals that you have set out. So those are the 8 key drivers of business. So how do we ultimately create value? Effective strategic and operational planning, value-based management that is focused on managing the company to create value, create a culture that is focused on value, focus on the performance of your people, empower them, and be an effective leader. These are the things that will give you the best opportunity to create value. Now, let's get into the planning phase now that we've talked about value. And there's a preamble that I want to talk about briefly. These are the things that you start before you get into a planning. You start with why. What is our purpose? Then you focus on developing the culture, and that culture is a function of your core values. So this is a preamble before you start planning to develop these items. And so the why concept is based on a guy by the name of Simon Sinek, who wrote a book called Start With Why. And essentially, this is the premise of the entire book, that people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. That so many organizations talk about what they do, but they don't spend time talking about why they do it, that why can connect people to you. And so you start with why, which is your purpose, your motivation. Then you go to how we get things done, which essentially gets to your competitive advantage. And then ultimately the what. And so this is called his golden circle. There's another representation of it here. It lays it out a bit more. And again, you see that why, which is important. What is your inspiration, your purpose? And look at how it's fueled by your core values and your beliefs, which are fundamental to your culture. How we get things done, what we get done, which is our competitive advantage, and finally, what we offer. So you start with why and start with what. And the flow from that why essentially starts at your purpose. And look at how this works out, because if you know anything about planning, these are key planning concepts, because that why leads to what we're trying to do, which is our purpose or our vision, how we plan to do it, which is our mission, what we plan to do, which encompasses your values, and our positioning. All that has to do with your developing strategic plan. So as we get to the why, the next thing we have to focus on is our culture. And I mentioned Peter Drucker, who is a guru in management. And as much as he focuses on management, Peter Drucker said an important thing, and that is culture eats strategy for breakfast. In other words, culture has to be predominant and preeminent in any organization in order to provide us a springboard for success. So let's talk a bit about the importance of culture. And it starts with our core values. Our core values define our culture. And when I say core values, you can have a lot of values, but core values should be no more than 7 to 10, usually on the lower side. What are the fundamental core things that are our values that infuse our culture? Because if we're successful doing this, then we understand that our culture, this is our cultural equation, if you will. Our values plus our talent plus our behaviors plus our purpose or our why. All of that creates our culture. And so a bit more on why culture matters. Our culture is based on assumptions and behaviors. And the assumptions and beliefs drive those behaviors. The behaviors of everyone in our organization determine our results. And our results measure whether or not we've reached our strategic objectives. So now we're beginning to connect the dots in terms of why culture and values are so important to our strategic plan, and that one of our primary objectives in our strategic plan is to create value. So we're building a bridge among these concepts to connect their importance. So the framework of the success, part 1, is to focus on our why, identify our core values, and create our culture out of those core values. And then we go to the second stage of that. It's about leadership, because it's about the performance of people, and leadership can have an impact, positive or negative, on the performance of people. The leaders have an impact on the culture and behaviors in the organization that drive results. So again, connecting the dots. So when we talk about culture, different aspects of culture, we'll start down here in the purple box, just because purple is my favorite color. And we're talking about the shared beliefs and values and assumptions held by people in the organization. That everyone, particularly in a small organization, everyone should be on the same page and buy into the culture of an organization. That it should be visible in what is done on a day-to-day basis, evident in the behavior of every individual and groups of individuals, teams, so on and so forth, amplified by behaviors of the leaders. If you are a leader in your group, you have to walk the talk. If you don't walk the talk, you lose credibility and that culture falls apart. And everything that you do in that business should be a function of the culture. So this is essentially that circle of culture, and every aspect of the business should be immersed in that culture. Any questions before I go on? Okay. So when we talk about values, they are the standards that govern behavior in your organization. They can be a moral compass for organizational practice. They sort of set the culture. They set the standards. They set the norms. It's an expression of the integrity that individuals and organizations believe in. And it is the key to the culture of the organization. And it is about understanding and embracing those values that can do all of these things listed here. Create understanding and trust of tolerance of different behaviors. Build trust, which is incredibly important. If you don't have trust, you have nothing. It can help in conflict resolution, define team behaviors, all of these things that are important to the development of a team that give you the best opportunity for success. And there are no right and wrong values, just like there's no right and wrong culture. Here are some examples of core values, but there's nothing right or wrong about this. It's a matter of what works for your organization. There are cultures that I've become aware of that I would fail miserably in because it doesn't align with my values. And so you want to think in terms of your individual values and how they align with the values of the organization.
We have a question, Michael.
Yep.
How does one keep that culture consistent on a long-term basis?
By over communicating the viability of those values, and by sometimes monthly polling people to see whether they still buy into those values. If they don't buy into those values, then you got to change them. So it is consistent communication, consistent reaffirmation. And if those values are not reaffirmed, then they need to be changed. And it needs to be more than a plaque on a wall or a nice 2-second statement at the beginning of a meeting. It should be communicated as fundamental to the success of the organization and revisited as often as possible. I recommend to my clients, you begin every meeting with a reaffirmation of those values. If those values cannot be reaffirmed, then you may deal with things that are crisis oriented, but you got to go back and figure out what are our values. Other questions? And if people get tired of you saying it, so what? Because as soon as you back away, people have convenient memories. And as the leader of your business, people are going to follow what you emphasize. So you need to emphasize these values. So when we talk about culture and planning, we just talked about culture. They are connected. And here's the connective tissue for these two categories. Your culture is your driving path. This is what drives the organization based on your values, practices, and behaviors. Concurrent with that, there's your strategy, which is your guiding path when you talk about goals, objectives, and activities, and both are necessary in order to achieve the results that you want, those results being the value of your business. Now, a normal strategic planning process that I would go through looks something like that. I'm not going to walk you through this. It's not as complicated as it looks, but this is fundamentally the strategic planning process that I use. Going back to our one-page concept, we can break that down to be a bit more simple, and that is a 5-step process. Analysis of the current situation, goal setting, including vision and mission, formulate your strategy, implement that strategy, and evaluate it, control and evaluate. So these are the 5 simple steps to the strategic planning process. The important one is the situation analysis. You have to understand where you are before you can know where you're going. So there are a couple of tools that I use that I can present to you with regard to this situation analysis. And the first one is the SWOT analysis. And I'm sure you've heard of that. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Strengths and weaknesses are internal to the organization. Threats and opportunities are external to the organization. And so you want to do an analysis of this. I even do SWOTs on individuals in a small company. Someone mentioned they're a 1 to 5 person team. If I was consulting with that team, I would do a form of a SWOT for each individual because essentially you are the organization. And so there's the SWOT analysis, and the whole point of the SWOT analysis, and again, here's another rendering of that, is figuring out what can help you, what can hurt you. At the end of the day, as you identify each element of the SWOT, here's what you want to do. You want to maximize your strengths, minimize your weaknesses, pursue your opportunities, and manage your threats. Oftentimes, those threats have to do with the environment. It goes back to something I talked about before about being proactive. After the SWOT, there's something called the 5 forces analysis. And essentially, this is about understanding more about the environment, understanding rivalry among competitors. What new entrants do we have? Who's going to come in that may be a competitor? Bargaining power of our customers. Do they have more? Are we more of a commodity? Can they sort of bargain us down? Can they get substitute products and services? I mentioned the entertainment dollar. I can go to a movie, or I can go to a restaurant. So can I do something else to entertain myself? And bargaining power of suppliers. If 90% of what I do comes from one supplier, that gives them a lot of bargaining power. That means they can drive up their costs to me. So this is called 5 forces analysis. And then there's the external analysis called the pestle analysis. PESTLE stands for political, economic, social, technological, environmental, and legal. These are all external dynamics that you need to understand. Again, you can't do anything about them directly, but you can be proactive in terms of how you manage them. So that's a situation analysis. Getting to the planning steps. You've seen this before: vision, mission, objectives, strategy, approach, and tactics. Vision is where you want to be in the future and when you want to get there. Mission is your why. Why are we in business? Objectives have to do with what we're trying to accomplish. Strategic is what is our approach strategically, tactically. Our approach is specific approaches that I'll talk about in a second, and then specific tactics. And if you can answer through all of this 6 fundamental questions that I don't have up here, but if any of you took journalism in school, you recognize these questions: who, what, when, where, why, and how. If you continually answer those 6 questions, you'll be in good shape. Who, what, when, where, why, and how. So these are the planning steps. And again, I'm sure you've all seen many of these before, maybe not the approach, but certainly most of this. When we talk about vision, it's future oriented. Essentially, what do you want to be when you grow up? That's the best way I can describe it. It's an ideal. It is something that the direction the organization wants to take, where we want to be. It is inspirational, or it should be inspirational. People should coalesce around this. I believe in the vision. This is what we want to do. And you want to make it simple. It shouldn't be something that is 4 paragraphs. It should be a very, very simple statement. If we have time, I'll take you through a couple of examples of vision statements. And it doesn't change that much. It changes infrequently. But it's a key step in the planning process. And so then you get to the mission, which is your why. And it talks about your purpose, your why. What are you trying to achieve? What needs to be happened to achieve it? And why do we exist? Again, it established usually at the highest levels, but if you're a small organization, you want to engage everyone into the development of the mission so you have a better opportunity for buy-in into the mission. You want to focus on something that you actually can do, which I'll talk more about in a second. And here are some of the questions you can ask. What do we do? Who do we do it for? How does it get done? Why do we do it? That sort of thing. And so your mission statement can take into account many, if not all, of these items. Why do we exist? What do we do? Who do we serve? What markets do we serve? Then we get to objectives, outcomes desired by the organization, which should be well defined. I'll talk about SMART objectives in a second. It creates clarity, and that clarity creates expectations, and those expectations facilitate accountability. There are benchmarks for success. They can create milestones along the way that you meet, everything designed to get you there. And you can have objectives for every level of the organization, from the very top to the lowest level, to the individual. These objectives should be SMART, and I'm sure you've seen this before: specific, measurable, et cetera, et cetera. Measurable is particularly important because otherwise, how do you know that you achieve success? Focusing more on SMART objectives. Again, quickly going through this, you don't just want to say, I want to dominate a market. I don't know what that means. In terms of specific objectives, you want to be specific with numbers and deadlines. I want to be a $50 million revenue business with profit margins of 12% by the end of 2026. Again, you want them to be measurable. You want them to be attainable. It's one thing to say that, well, we're going to be $150 million businesses a week. That's probably not attainable. So you want to have something that is attainable, but it's still a stretch. You want it to be realistic in terms of the resources you have available to you, and you want to have time frames involved with it. Again, this is a repeat of what I had up there before with regard to strategy. And essentially, you want to be able to answer or address that last bullet, because that is the fundamentals of why you're in business. So There are a number of approaches to playing, and I realize I'm going a little fast here, but those of you who desire to have a copy of this, I can give it to you, or I can give it to Christy and she can get it out to you. So there are a couple of planning approaches. There's the reactive approach, which means I'm focused more on the past, and that'll be the basis upon which we plan. There's an inactive approach, which means I like what we're doing now. We're going to continue that. There's a preactive approach, which means you're trying to predict the future, which most of us cannot do. What I would recommend is a proactive approach, and that is focusing on creating that future. So there are a couple of aspects of strategic planning: exploit current advantages, explore for new advantages. What are we doing now that we think is viable? What else can we do that we think will be viable? And when we talk about strategy versus tactics, this is sort of an argument people get into. I think this slide will be helpful, that this is what we do on a strategic side. This is what we do on the tactical side. They are parallel. What I mean by that is this first bullet, strategy is the intent, corresponds to the first bullet here. Tactics is putting intent to action. And as you go down this list, you'll see the differences between the two. You want to take that into account when you're talking about creating a strategy versus identifying tactics. Strategy implementation. Again, here's what you need to do. You have a series of projects. You need to have resources allocated to those projects. They need to be operated within an organizational structure. Senior management, and most of you are senior management, needs to be involved with the creation of this. You're talking about creating change, so you need to understand how to support the change process. Being a leader of change, communicate. In fact, over-communicate, manage perceptions, and get feedback. And as you can see, this is a circular process. With regard to strategy evaluation and control, again, SMART objectives: determine what to measure, establish predetermined standards, measure performance against those standards. If performance matches the standards, fine. If not, you need to take corrective action. So then the flow of value creation is vision and all of the things associated with that in terms of mission. Develop your strategy, create your strategic plan, and execute against that plan. Now, fundamentally, most strategic plans fail. And most strategic plans fail because of what's in red here. 10% of the plans succeed because of this. You want to be in that 10%. Please do not fall prey to this 90% here. And the best advice I can give you for putting together a successful strategic plan is to get help. This is not an easy process at all. So I suggest you get help, someone who can help walk you through this, who can sort of decode elements that are questionable, to help keep you motivated, to help hold you accountable for the development of your strategic plan. So I'm going to skip the questions part and very quickly walk through this and let you know that in the appendix, there are examples of vision statements and mission statements. There's a summary here about what a mission is, what a vision is. There's value statements here. So I have Starbucks, Virgin Group. There are vision statements. And as you can see, these vision statements are short and memorable. There are mission statements. I do not recommend these first three mission statements because I think they're entirely too long. My favorite mission statement is this last one. If you don't recognize Winston Wolfe was a character in a movie called Pulp Fiction that came out 30 years ago, I think it was. And he knocked on the door, introduced himself, and said, "My name is Winston Wolfe, and I solve problems." That is the best mission statement I've ever heard. And so again, summary of mission, vision, and value statements that can give you some idea of what to do with those statements. And we are coming to the end of our time, and I realize I went through that faster than Usain Bolt ran the 100-meter dash in the Olympics. And I apologize for that, but the information is here. And Christy, is there an opportunity for them to have subsequent follow-up questions?
Yes, definitely. There are definitely a few questions here floating around. Is there a different strategic plan for solopreneurs?
No, You have fewer resources to deal with. And you may find in the creation of that plan, you need more resources. But no, the fundamentals are here. And I would say follow them. Just certain questions about other people, you're not in a position to answer right now.
Will you be sharing a model of a one-page strategic planning document as part of this presentation?
The model is here. And what I would say is, it's about answering these 5 questions. And I apologize, I don't know any faster way to get back through this. If you can do these 5 things, if you can take these 5 steps, that'll get you there. And essentially, it's more than one page, but this is the starting point. And this will lead you to all the things that you need to address. And these are the 5 steps. I don't want you to do that because it's too involved. If you can do these 5 things with the additional material that I've given you, then you'll be in good shape.
As a small business owner, where can we look for metrics? What should I be aiming to achieve? What would it mean? What would mean success for my small business?
That really is a personal decision. So if you want to create financial wealth, then you want your business to grow and be profitable. You have to decide what profitability is. Part of getting some dimensions on that is talk to your SCORE advisor. And I'm sure SCORE has information about the market that you want to serve, the business that you're in. And they can have certain information that they can bring to bear that shows you, here are some of the things that people in your business are doing. Here's some of their financial results, their market results, those kinds of things. So that can give you an idea. But at the end of the day, you have to decide what you want out of your business. And you have to decide what defines success for you. Because if your view of success is not a personal, deeply ingrained concept, then you're going to be less than successful carrying out what someone else has set for you as a standard.
This person's question is, how does one effectively navigate a coaching/consulting business where a large part of their target audience are minors?
Are minors? Oh my. Can you repeat?
So I guess it would be like reaching the parents. The parents would need to see the need that the minor. So this is around, I guess, video game addiction.
Okay. Well, first of all, and this raises a good point. You have to understand who your customer really is. And this is a really good point. I'm glad it was raised. In this situation, your customer is the parent. You may be working with the child, but the customer is the parent. It's the customer. The parent is the customer. And I don't remember the rest of the question, but can you repeat the question again?
Sure. How does one effectively navigate a coaching and consulting business when a large part of the target audience are minors?
Yeah, you start with the parents and you give whatever your value proposition is. And so let's take addicted to video games. And why are people addicted to video games? What is the downside of that? And so it's understanding what parents' concerns are and then addressing those concerns. It goes back to something I said before. Customers are in pain. In this case, parents are in pain because their children are addicted to video games. So then you have to come up with a value proposition that says, here is how I can help you alleviate that pain through whatever programs you have. And so that's how you address it. And I don't mean to be hyperbolic, but if you think in terms of your customers being in pain, that can help you focus on the seriousness of your value proposition in terms of alleviating that pain. So that's how I would approach it.
No, Mr. Mobley is not a SCORE mentor, but with his permission, I'm going to drop his email address. Is that okay?
That's fine.
Okay, so I'm going to drop the email address. And yes, everyone will get a copy of the recording and slides by tomorrow. Michael will send me the PDF file of this, and you will have that. So check your email. If you don't get it for some reason, just let me know. And with that, we are right at 11:30. So thank you so much, Michael. This was a lot of information. And again, yes, towards the end, it was really fast, but you will have copies of it and you can reach out to Michael or your SCORE mentor. They are all trained to work with strategic plans, business plans, marketing plans, any kind of plans. SCORE also has a lot of templates. So check out our SCORE resources. You can reach out to me. You can respond to the email I send out if you have any other specific questions or just needing some direction. But thank you so much, Michael. And we look forward to having you present for us again. I believe we offered this particular one quarterly. So any last minute thoughts or anything for our viewers today, Michael?
Now I have a question for you, but after the fact. But no, I just want to thank everyone for participating. I hope you had an opportunity to learn something that will be impactful for your business. Again, apologize for the rapidity, but this is obviously a topic that needs more time. But I will at least send you or send Christy the slides. And again, any follow-up questions, please let me know.
And yes, Michael does have social media, and I could give you his LinkedIn information as well in that follow-up email. All right, have a great one, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.